Hello and welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place. I'm Dave Rome. Joining me this week, Brad Copeland, mechanic to the stars. How are you?
Doing well, Dave. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Brad, you've had a bit of a move. You're jumping around between states at the moment. So now in Washington, D.C. this week?
I'm in Washington, D.C. as we speak. I'm working at Precision Bicycle Services with my longtime friend Greg Thomas, who is a fellow bicycle extraordinaire and someone who was instrumental in my career path for quite a number of years. So it's nice to be back with Greg, and we've been having a good time these past few days.
Nice. And Greg's a full-time Escape Collective member / Corrections Corner submitter and part-time pro mechanic. So
yeah, when he has time between podcasts, he might throw a bike in the stand. But we do. We listen to him at work. So he's an enthusiastic listener. Cool. A curmudgeon at heart, but a very enthusiastic listener who enjoys the show, and hopefully everyone else listening feels similarly.
Nice. We might have to do a podcast with at some point with both you and Greg on, where we can
a special edition in more ways than one. Yeah.
Ask two wrenches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ask two wrenches, get two answers.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, this week we've got, I'd say it's a bit of a lighter week in terms of the tech news, which is probably really good news for those that don't like to hear about the latest in tech, and bad news for those that do. But doesn't mean we've got a small episode. We've got plenty to get through. There is a little bit of news to cover. We've got a pick one. We will certainly have Ask a Wrench questions, and perhaps even a little PSA. So, Brad, I think before we move into some other segments, I think let's talk about some of the latest tech that we've got this week. And this one's launching as we're recording. Hunt H-Cyclo. So Hunt Wheels, UK-based consumer direct wheel brand. They seem to be the first to market with this ability to recycle thermoset carbon fiber. I guess, to give a bit of a background on that, like, it's very different to the recycling programs from CSS, who make the rims for like Chris King and Forge and Bond and others, which are thermoplastic, which basically just, they melt the combining material out and they're left with the raw carbon. Normally with thermoset carbon, that's the type that the resin gets injected into the carbon, and then the resin becomes basically one piece, and it's very difficult to then undo that resin. And this technology seems to allow them to actually effectively melt that resin out with a chemical reaction. So it seems pretty promising. What do you reckon about it?
Well, it is sort of unnerving to think about all these years that have gone by without the ability to recycle carbon fiber, considering the scale of it and all the applications outside of bikes as well as in the bicycle industry. So that's good that there is now an option to begin recycling some of the material and reusing the parts that are reusable. It seems like it would be more useful to industry maybe than it would be to a consumer of bicycle wheels, I would say. And I know we talked a little bit about this, Dave, going over the show about the locations too of them for recycling these wheels only in Asia and in Europe, which leaves me high and dry and with a bit of a ethical paradox on my hands, whether I should ship a wheel set halfway around the world to recycle it or save the gas, fuel, whatever, and just throw it in the trash. But like all things, I'm sure this will evolve into let's say a more globally friendly technology. And I like the idea. I think the more you can reuse and not waste stuff, and that's kind of a game I like to play in the workshop and try to save things and reuse things as many times as I can before putting them in the trash. So I'm all for it conceptually. I think it's an interesting concept. And if the wheels are also of comparable quality, which they claim to be, weights and strengths are all as equivalent to basically to what we can call a standard carbon wheel. So no real downside.
So to give a bit more background, I mean, this certainly does come from big industry. It's actually, I believe it was first applied in wind turbines. where they're basically using very, very long lengths of carbon tow, and they want to recycle those. And it seems like, while Hunt are calling this H-Cyclo, which is kind of their rebranding of the tech, it does seem like it's from a Taiwanese company called Swancore, who's sort of providing these resins, and then also the what they call a cleaver, which is their fancy name for the chemical that breaks down this stuff. So as Brad, as you just mentioned, they've got recycling facilities they've got 2 in Asia and 1 in Europe, and Hunt themselves are basically saying they'll, if your wheels come to the end of their life, whether that's a warranty or not, they'll pay to collect the wheels and take them back to one of these facilities, and they'll also offer a trade-in value for if you're returning wheels at end of life, whatever that means. So it seems interesting. I think the applications are probably far greater outside of cycling, but it seems like Hunt might be the first mover to use this stuff within the bicycle world, and dare I say, they certainly won't be the last if the chemical properties and if the structural properties are as perfect as they say they are, or as trade-off free as they say they are. So for Hunt, they're starting with a gravel wheel, a 40mm depth gravel wheel. It's 25mm wide hookless rim, and they'll be offering this with both dynamo options and more regular hubs. General Hunt good pricing, but the big story here is just this new thermoset technology that with the new recyclable resin, which I think is neat. But and Hunt have
reducing our carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and Hunt have suddenly come out and said that they'll, this is just the first wheel to be using this, and that they plan to bring multiple others, and it is actually a part of a larger shift from Hunt. They're trying to get to like a neutral, zero emission company. So they're making all sorts of initiatives around using like recycled aluminium in some of their rims, and now implementing this new carbon fiber technology, and doing other initiatives around this. So certainly making some moves in this space. But the Swancore, the manufacturer of this stuff, is they certainly make some big claims around being able to recycle the raw carbon tow with no trade-off in performance, which I think is neat. So
I think that's the key too for Hunt and any other brands that use a technology like this. Speaking personally, when I hear things like biodegradable or recyclable or made from recycled materials, I don't always assume that it's a high performance product, or I might assume or feel or believe without any proof that it is somehow inferior to those that are not recyclable or biodegradable or reusable or made from, reclaimed goods or whatever you want to say. So I think the emphasis, or maybe the key, is to not emphasize that as much, maybe to offer it, maybe market it for a moment, but not like beat that drum too hard, because I don't think that, the implication is, whether right or wrong, is that, sometimes these recycled goods may be somehow inferior to like the pure product. And I would hope, and I know that's not the case, or at least not what they're claiming. So I would just like them to, back that up. And once we see these in real life and get some product reviews or testing done, it'd be cool to see if that's really true and how those stack up compared to, let's say, normal carbon wheels.
Yeah. And I guess for me, like the really big question is like, say you do go to the effort of shipping a wheel back to one of the 3 recycling facilities in the world. They melt out the resin. They're left with the raw carbon tows. But how do they then reuse those? Because it seems like a lot of handling labor, and that it would still be cheaper and more efficient, and therefore more attractive for a manufacturer just to use raw, fresh carbon, straight off the reel kind of thing. Rather than try to, piecemeal reuse pieces. So I think for me, that's the big question. But hopefully they've figured out that next stage of the cycle as well, rather than just, having the ability to do it and not actually doing it. So we'll see. But definitely interesting development.
Maybe when you aggregate, you've seen how big a wind turbine is. You could probably make a few wheel sets out of reclaimed carbon out of one of those things. Those things are pretty big. So, once you've recycled every last thing that's possible, like I was saying, it seems more like appropriate for industrial scale than for like a relatively small bicycle wheel manufacturer.
Absolutely.
But
so
I think that once you collect all the, aggregate scrap carbon from an industrial operation such as a wind farm, then you would be left with a sizable amount of usable carbon fiber. And so while Hunt's contribution to that pile may be relatively small, I think that if you can recover that much carbon from industrial scale, wind farms and massive operations like that, then there's some merit to this operation. So maybe we should think a little bit bigger than just what Hunt themselves are doing at the moment, and appreciate such a novel concept. Yeah, it's kind of it's pretty cool technology. So good for them.
For sure. Yeah, one to watch, and I guess well done to Hunt for being what I think is the first in the cycling industry. I could be mistaken on that, but yeah, it's cool to see. Also on the new front, Wolftooth. Seems like they drop a new product every single week, which is quite funny. But this week they've launched a premium internal cabled headset. But this one is specifically designed to match up and provide a perfect fitment with Envy's in-route system. So anyone using like the Envy one-piece handlebar or the new in-route stems. It's interestingly currently just an external cup headset for a 44mm diameter head tube. So really aimed at like the custom hand-built bike world. So it makes sense that they launched this one in time for Made that happened over the weekend just past. What do you think of this thing?
Yeah, it looks like they, like you said, it's a 44mm internal diameter head tube standard that they're working around. And it seems like a nice product. It's what I like about it, in addition to the tidy appearance, which is very nice and available in many colors and everything you've come to expect from Wolftooth in that regard. Seems like it's a very lightweight little headset. It's like just over 100 grams. I think it's like 113 grams all in if you do both upper and lower. Low stack height, tidy appearance. I saw a few bikes with it actually from the Made show. So I think it's a nice option, and it's almost like I think I saw that it had a lifetime warranty, which is noteworthy for anything in the bike industry. And it's also very like thoroughly and maybe redundantly sealed against the elements. So against water incursion, all the way from the top cap down, it sounded like even the top cap above the stem has some rubber sealing in there to help water not enter and creep down your steer tube.
They are well sealed.
Yeah. So obviously, we often lament the internal routing through headset bearings and the problems and sort of the negligent maintenance that sometimes results from having to either deal with that or just ignore it for as long as you can. And a lot of people opt to ignore. So hopefully this, if it's as well executed as it sounds like, I think we can expect that the maintenance interval on those headset bearings themselves is probably going to be pretty friendly to the consumer, to the home mechanic or the shop mechanic even.
Yeah, so I think the main feature of this is actually the colors. So it's available in Wolftooth's full array of anodized colors, but it feels to me a bit like it's, dare I say, unfinished, because from what I can tell, they don't currently produce matching headset spacers, which feels somewhat like a necessary item. If you're going to go to the trouble of buying a colored headset, you probably want the matching headset spacers, and these use their own headset spacer.
I believe that they mentioned that they will be offering those headset spacers in colors. It's a split spacer, yes, and integrated in the shape of the, it basically has like cable entry behind the stem. It looks like two ports for the hoses to route down and into the frame. And I would expect then, although I didn't see a photo because all the bikes had SLAM stems, were looking super pro at the Made, show on display. They didn't have much spacer stack, but I can imagine that it would be sort of a profiled spacer that's shaped and kind of interlocks in profile with the kind of not a perfectly round top bearing cap for the headset. It's kind of elliptical or sort of oblong to accept the hoses behind the stem. So I think that that means the spacers will sort of follow that profile. And the one thing I hope for that I've had a little bit of a gripe with, if I have to raise a red flag on Wolftooth, who I think make great products, sometimes those anodized spacers are not all the same color, even when they're supposed to be. You'll get kind of variations on a hue, it's slightly
anodizing is hard.
I know. So, but if you compare to the Chris Kings of the world, who've been producing pretty consistent anodizing across many products for many years, I'd say they could improve that aspect. of their production. But otherwise, it's a pretty nice product. It's super clean. It appears that there will be some spacers available, if not now, then soon. And yeah, it's one of many innovations from Wolftooth week after week, and we talk about a lot of them.
Nice. I guess the only other point of contention for me is I actually don't think an external headset looks very good with internal cabling. Like, it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of a weird match to have like this round headset sitting wider than the head tube and then match it with this like ultra clean lack of, lack of external cables. For me, I kind of associate external cup headsets with more of an old school visual and a more simple approach to bike design. And whereas I kind of associate more the integrated cabling where it goes through the stem and the difficulties of that, I associate that more with the cleanliness of like an integrated headset where the bearing sits within the frame. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being silly, but
yeah, I agree with you there. Actually, I mean, the integrated headset came along a lot earlier in the progress of bicycles and innovations than internally routed everything. That was like a turn of the millennium kind of innovation. I think Cannondale maybe was among the first to bring an integrated headset to market on the CAD 5 and 6 road bikes that came out in around 2000, 2001. That's where you first started seeing cups machined into mass-produced frames anyway. And so I agree with you. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a funny combination, but obviously there are frames that sort of work around that standard, and so you got to have some up there. Yeah.
Anyway, still cool. Nice to have options. Very cool. Nice to have colored options, but perhaps for me, I'm waiting for those headset spaces, and I think I'd still personally prefer a bike that has an integrated headset if going to the trouble of hiding those cables. But anyway, hey, each their own.
That's right.
All right, let's take a very quick break, and we'll be back with a pick one. All right, Brad, pick one for this week. I was thinking, and it's something I'd like to do more in depth in the near future with a threaded article. But I was thinking, given off the back of the inflator article that I did for Threaded a couple of weeks ago, one of the features that I guess is a BYO feature for a lot of those electric inflator pumps is a good quality Presta pump head. And this is something that you could add to your existing floor pump. It's something you could certainly add to an inflator, perhaps even use with an air compressor. Do you have a favorite Presta pump head?
I do. And as is my custom when it comes to pick one, I'm going to pick two. So I'll tell you.
One really terrible option that you use, and then another really pretty good option that people can understand. Yeah.
No. I'll do one for. So where to begin, Dave? I think you probably have tested or stand to test more of these in the future if you haven't already than I have. I'm more of someone who picks high quality things that have a good reputation. When I'm satisfied, I usually stop there. Here are my two.
That's a smart way to live, Brad.
Well, yeah, I know.
Whereas I find one I'm really satisfied with, I'm confident it's the right one, and then field suggestions from people that haven't used the best one that I already have, and that tell me they're really happy with their far inferior option, and then I go out and buy the inferior option and go, yeah, it's inferior.
Yeah,
and then continue to do that. I keep coming back to the one that I'm.
Years.
Yeah. And poor.
Yes.
All right, sorry.
So
go ahead.
Anyway, we digress. But so the first inflator that I had, like a digital gauge battery operated handheld inflator, was a Craftsman product, which you've probably tried at some point. It's kind of old school. It looks like a drill, actually, like a cordless drill, but it's an inflator.
Yeah.
And I had a Silca head on that from a Silca pump that I cut and just fashioned to the existing hose from the Craftsman tool. Silca is super high quality. It's a brass head, like they, tend to use, with a nice O-ring that's like silicone inside so it doesn't break down. And
leather, I believe.
Is it leather inside there? Oh God,
maybe
I think
maybe I'm thinking of the gasket in their pumps. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Continue.
I think that's what you're thinking of. Yes. But I think it's a silicone rubber rather than like a butyl one that tends to crack and dry out over time, which a lot of cheaper pumps use to save 5 cents in manufacturing. So Silca's pumps are sort of regarded as like a high-end pump in general, and so that's where I started and ended with that one, and it worked great. Never failed. It was great actuation. Didn't leak. It was lovely. Super high quality. Still have it. It's great. The other one, though, is the shop option, which for me, my preference and favorite that I've used and where I stopped was with EVT, Efficient Velo Tools. It's an American brand from the Pacific Northwest. Are they in Oregon as well? Dave, you probably know this. Portland, isn't it?
I think they've moved, but yeah.
I'm sure someone will chime in and let us know. Nevertheless, they make some really great shop oriented tools and shop quality tools. And so this is like for use with a compressor as opposed to maybe the handheld battery powered ones that you're talking about and have done your article on. But if you have a compressor at home or in your garage or something like that, the EVT Presta head, you can get it with just like a trigger actuated inflator or one with a gauge on it, so you can get a pressure reading too. I've always just used the traditional one without the gauge, but I'm sure that they're both equally as good. So that would be my other option.
Yeah, I mean the EVT has long been one of my favorites to use as far as a Presta head, but it is also, currently, if I'm not mistaken, only available with the sort of air compressor based inflators from them, and they're not cheap, but yeah, there's just something about the fitment of that works wonderfully. But I have heard recent reports of someone in the UK, Rhino's Workshop. He was sort of saying he wasn't a fan of the EVT because he was finding it was scratching up valve stems, which I haven't noticed, but he's moved to back to the Silka press-on pump head, given that. So yeah, maybe I suspect he's probably using a lot of plastic valve stems and similar that really show the damage, but I hadn't noticed that, and I've got quite a lot of years of use out of the EVT, but food for thought, and something I'll be looking into in future. But yeah, so anyway, EVT is a really nice option if you've got an air compressor, and yeah, certainly is my favorite there. I would say if you're upgrading a floor pump or an inflator, my favorite ones are the ones that just sort of like have what's effectively like a Schrader adapter on them, so you can just screw them straight into your existing pump. You don't have to like cut the hose and use a hose clamp and go to all the trouble of trying to reseal it. You can just literally thread them in. And yeah, so for that, Silka do really good ones. They do both the press-on style and their Hero Chuck, which has the flip lever. I prefer the press-on style versus the Hero Chuck. That's a great option. Also, a Rundle is well worth a look if you can find them. They seem to be increasingly hard to find in certain areas, but they, in my experience, work about as well as the Silka stuff, but are about half the price. So yeah, and then the one that I've been playing with this week, and is something that I will be covering in Threaded. As you're hearing this, if you go to Escape Collective and check out the latest Threaded, which is a new Tools Day gallery covering the latest things that I've been playing with, Presta-Cycle recently came out with a new Pro Presta head, and basically it's got this little locking mechanism. So you just simply push the head onto your valve, and it locks in place. And then to undo, there's a little red button that pops up once it's engaged, and you just push that button and it disengages. And it's super clean to use, super simple. Not a cheap item. Like I think they're $45, $50 if I'm not mistaken for the pump head, but seems to be quite promising. So yeah, I'm very keen to see how it holds up with more consistent use and longer term. But yeah, I've heard from other shop guys who've probably used 3-4 months on these things, and they're typically the people that have used them swear by them. So it seems promising. Yeah, there you go, plenty of options.
Have you found any cheap ones that impressed you given the cost?
Yeah, the cheap ones that I tend to get on with a Rundle. I tend to, I think they've raised their prices on them. I think they're closer to about $30 US now. But yeah, those are a pretty reliable fit, and they stay on the valve and they don't leak, and they're then easy to remove, which are kind of my requirements for a good Presta pump head.
Yeah, it's a pain when they're really hard to remove, and you end up punching the cassette or disc rotor in the process of removing your pump head from your valve, which I've done a million times. So that definitely can lead you to the wrong end of the column of our discussion of which pump head to buy. So
exactly.
I think of Topeak, which I was a team sponsor of ours. I think they make great pumps, and some of their heads are good, and some are maybe it's the lower end ones that are a little more plasticky, and the fitment's not so perfect. And and so sometimes you have to struggle a lot, and you maybe think you're doing it wrong. You're still locked on, and the levers flip the right way, and there could be kind of a unpleasant end when you end up punching something on the back of your bike. It's usually never something soft or something round and smooth. So
I'm going to do this segment in reverse, where I explain the problem now with why we can have favorite pump heads, which is that most are actually quite terrible for Presta. Most tend to leak quite a bit of air when you're attaching them. They can be hard to engage to create a seal that doesn't leak air while you're using it. Some of them pop off while you're using them, and you often see people holding their pump head in place while they're inflating. You shouldn't have to do that. And then when you remove it, a lot of pump heads tend to leak the air that you've just filled while you remove it. So the pressure that you think you've set your tire to is now lower by the time you actually disengage the valve. And as Brad said, some of the ones that don't leak then are a nightmare to remove, where you end up bleeding as a result of pulling off the pump head. So there's a surprising number of terrible options out there, but the ones that we sort of mentioned before, I guess, tick all the boxes in, not being too hard to remove, but still being a reliable seal and not leaking a fortune of air when you remove them. So life can be better, and you can start with a new pump head. This is especially true for if you've got, I think this is something we've actually discussed before, but if you've got like a Lezyne style screw-on pump, do yourself a favor, get one of the ones that we mentioned, like a Silka or a Rundle or this new Presta-Cycle one, and thread it straight into your pump, and don't fight with that threaded valve anymore. So plenty of options. All right, Brad. Well, I think we've got time for have a little bit of a PSA, and then we'll get into some Ask a Wrench questions. So the PSA that I was thinking, public service announcement, is there's a lot of talk about chain wax and how chain wax is the superior option, and dipping your chain in hot melt wax is the best way to go and all that. But I think I'd like to remind people that drip lubes can also be great, but like anything, whatever lube you choose, whether it's chain wax or not, or a drip lube, the main thing is everything can be misused, and the cleaner you keep whatever you use it, the better it'll be. So that's the PSA. Thoughts, additions?
PSA, read the directions on the bottle of whatever you're using. It often is very deliberate and explicit, and no two lubes are alike, really. And so, some have times, setup time basically that you need to factor in. Some, some may not. But fundamentally, starting with a clean surface, I would say that's like paramount, especially if you're changing lubes from one to the next. But even if you're not, and if you're not waxing your chain, and especially if you're using like an oil-based or a wetter lube, spend 3 times the amount of time just to clean the chain as you would, just to reapply the lube. It's I tell people to wipe off their chain every time they ride with a little bit, if they have a little solvent, like little chain, like kind of drivetrain cleaner at home on a rag, you just wipe off the surfaces of like the pulley wheel teeth, the chain ring teeth, to the extent you can, kind of your cassette, and obviously wipe your chain down. But don't just keep applying lube sort of for no reason, kind of have a plan and know why you're doing it and when and what your intervals are, and kind of get to know the product well. That would be my advice. And just keep it clean and kind of take the time to actually go through the motions to, it may be more than just wiping off your chain. There could be some, taking your chain off solvent, cleaning your chain and blowing it out with the air hose if you can, and maybe doing it more than one time to start with the cleaning process of the chain, as you would with chain wax too. But I think in general too, sometimes people have bad experiences using lubes or write them off, but they haven't necessarily either cleaned the chain correctly to begin with before using it, which then undermines its performance, or they're using too much of it, or using it like some lubes that have a liquid carrier that sort of evaporates, leaving a film of, wax or some type of Teflon based product behind. If you don't let it evaporate, then it's like you're just running solvent through your chain as lube rather than lube. Yeah. And so, it's like doing the opposite kind of. So be attentive to the directions and the instructions on the bottle as a first step, and then clean, step 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I would go as far to say that, it's probably the only bicycle maintenance thing that every cyclist probably participates in, but I would go as far to say that it's the most widely misused product in cycling, from what I've seen. Like, if you think about in bike shop days or, in the workshop, it's almost every bike that comes in, you can kind of think of ways that they could improve how they're using chain lube. And yeah, I mean, it's the misuse is pretty rampant. So like, I guess some signs of misuse is like if you're using a wax strip on lube like Squirt or Smooth or Silk or something, and it's building up really heavily around the pulley wheels, chances are you're over applying it, and or not cleaning it, not wiping it down, as Brad says, between reapplications. So you really shouldn't be getting that really significant build up where you can no longer see your pulley wheels. And yeah, at the same time, like, yeah, if you're using an oil-based lube and you're scared to touch your chain, you're not cleaning it often enough. You should be, your chain shouldn't be a black greasy mess all the time. It should be just lightly lubed. You don't need the lube on the outside of the chain. It should, just be internally of the chain, that oil, and you should be able to run your leg against the chain without then feeling like you need to degrease your leg. So I think there's a few elements there, but it also applies to chain waxing. I'd say anytime I see someone that is chain waxed, hot melt waxed, it feels like they've left it too long. It feels like their chain needed to be re-waxed the previous ride. And I'd say a lot of people are oblivious to it, but like, I often hear this beautifully clean drivetrain where they've clearly waxed the chain, but it's squeaking. And that to me is, far too long. And before it starts squeaking, I find that like the rollers get a little bit floppy. Like if you hold the chain, it gets a little bit rattly where there's not like really any internal wax holding that roller in place. Kind of just feels like, if you've just freshly degreased a chain and there's no lube sort of keeping the rollers in place. Rattly is how I'd describe it. So yeah, if you've got that sort of roller, if you can sort of shake your chain and hear the rollers rattle and you're on chain wax, you've probably left it too long between intervals, and you should readjust how long you think that chain wax is lasting for. But yeah, I think it's a good takeaway. But fundamentally, I think whatever chain lube you pick, just know that the cleaner you keep it, the longer everything will last. And I think that's the main thing to know.
I would agree. And, the buildup of old lube mixed with dirt and gritty stuff that might linger on your drivetrain components, even if you have wiped your chain off and cleaned it, you have to also do your best to get the residuals off everything else, because that kind of gritty, waxy, gunky substance is basically an abrasive that under load will prematurely wear out elements of your drivetrain as well. So it's good not just for dirtiness sake, but also for longevity's sake to pay
Massively
attention to all the components. And a funny one, and one that I also kind of enjoy seeing, but not really enjoy it, but is when a derailleur pulley is so gunked up with old lube that it actually sort of forms a disc where the cage of the derailleur is like squeegeed away the gunk, and it's just like a perfect puck of old gunky chain lube that's accumulated. And oftentimes
super arrow.
Super arrow. So Ceramic Speed took some design cues for their new OSPW from that, but actually the pulleys themselves are under no load really from the drivetrain. It's all across, from the chain rings to the cassette in the back, and the derailleur is just guiding the chain through and up to the cassette. So those, oftentimes those pulley wheels are a composite or a plastic-like material, and it runs quieter that way. Of course, a metal chain on plastic, when there's some resistance built in, the plastic is the one that wears first. And so you'll often see those pulley teeth like shaped very pointy or like a shark's fin, or almost a completely just worn away disc sometimes, where they've really been left too long, which is incredible to see, and you do sometimes see. But yeah, that's like the worst case scenario of not cleaning your pulley wheels when so much lube and gunk accumulates that it actually resists their spinning. And that's where resistance in the chain to derailleur pulley interface, actually it does exist, and then causes like rapid wear, this absolute destruction of the pulley wheels. It doesn't take very long once that's happening. So definitely whatever you do, don't let it get that far. And one of the most cathartic things in the bike shop, I would put a trash can under your bike when you do this, so you don't track this stuff into your house on your shoe, is to hold the flat blade of a screwdriver against the edge of your pulley wheel and backpedal your bike, and just scrape all that stuff away in a huge long chunk of goo and just throw that right in the trash. It's very satisfying. I think every mechanic that I know really derives some satisfaction from that experience. And it does make a good difference too in terms of the performance and longevity of things. So
it does. But I'd say if you're having to regularly do that, you're overloading.
You mess something up along the way. Yeah, for sure.
All good. All right. Yeah. Well, that's the PSA. Brad, I think it's time for Ask a Wrench.
Hey chaps, it's George here, originally from the UK, now living in Los Angeles. Question, trying to help a buddy. He's switching from 11-speed SRAM to 12-speed Force AXS. He's actually on a time trial bike. And from what I'm seeing now with the Force 12-speed AXS is the biggest front chainring I can get to is a 50 tooth. So appreciate on the rear cassette you can have a wide range from 10 up to I think 36 on the wide, but it feels like he's always going to be shifting down the bottom end of the cassette, where ideally I'd like to keep a straighter chain line for him. I spoke to Rotor. They're saying 50 is the biggest that's supported. I do have some larger Rotor rings. They work with the SRAM 11 speed and I think work fine with the Shimano 12 speed. I'm just wondering if I can make that work on the AXS setup. Any thoughts appreciated? Cheers.
All right, Brad. Any tips for George trying to help a mate with a time trial bike with a 12-speed AXS? Thoughts?
So, yes, I do have some thoughts. And I agree that your existing front derailleur, which is, he's using a force group, it's a force axis group, you are limited to a 50 tooth. And that can be for one of two reasons. Usually it's due to the shape of the derailleur, like the inner and outer plate of the derailleur cage of the front derailleur, where it basically pushes, the chain from one chainring to the next. It's sort of anticipating a certain range of chainring sizes where it will line up with the chain on the small ring to push it up to the big ring, for example. And sometimes you're also limited by how high you can actually raise the front derailleur on a braze-on mount based on where the hole, the mounting bolt hole is located. And so you may hit a maximum height on your frame that would prevent you from raising it higher than the larger chain rings that you're interested in using. However, there is a new SRAM Red derailleur. I believe the nomenclature is the E1 type derailleur. Is that the
That's
right
correct
one there, Dave? Yep. Yeah, I thought
and
that was the right one.
Two versions of it.
There are two versions of it, yes, and that one has the capacity for 50 plus tooth size chain rings, so you can go up to like the full blown like big boy pro time trial.
It's their pro race front derailleur, basically.
Correct.
Yeah,
right. So it's not as easy as I wish it was. It does require a unique part that it sounds like you do not yet own, but that is the surefire solution. If you do have the capacity to raise the derailleur height high enough to try it, you may try and see that it works satisfactorily with your existing front derailleur. I've tried it myself and I've had it work, but it's not perfect, and you kind of have to work with it a little bit, if you know what I mean. It's a little bit of technique involved to kind of help the shift up to the big ring. That's specifically where I had it be a little bit laggy and resistant until it would kind of delay for a moment before it would find a shift ramp and pick up and move to the large ring. But it was passable if you kind of understood the system and the limitations and how to work within it. But if you don't want to deal with all that, the SRAM Red one does work pretty much flawlessly and is quite effective. And I've used it personally on bikes with larger than 50 tooth chain rings and had just nothing but perfect results. So that would be the easy way. And of course, as an AXS component, it plugs right into your existing system and there's no compatibility
it doesn't plug
issues.
in, it's wireless.
It connects. And so you should have no further troubles. Yeah, I got to be careful with my terms these days.
Brad,
but yes, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, George is asking about using rotor chainrings because he's got some in a larger size. Thoughts on that with a flat top 12-speed chain? Any experience there?
My inclination is that you would be okay there. They do use a different size roller for those SRAM chains. SRAM, that is, claim that you are to use it with SRAM chain rings, but they've been saying that since the 10-speed days, that their chain rings and chains are only compatible with each other, which isn't really the case. I have not tried it, and so I cannot say that I know for sure, but I have seen non-SRAM chain rings used with SRAM products before, and some of them may have been unique tooth shapes. I'm not sure, but I've seen some pro bikes set up that way, and I've wondered that myself, but I've not seen it not work. And so I would say it probably works with 90-ish%, what you would say perfect performance, maybe not exactly how SRAM engineered it, but I don't think it would be enough to cause catastrophic failure, for example.
In my experience, the flat top causes more issues with 1x chainrings, where it's a narrow wide tooth profile and the tooth profile is designed to hug the chain rollers really closely. But in a 2x configuration where the chainring doesn't have that profiling on it, fewer issues tend to arise. And I think it is probably going to be okay. So certainly worth trying those rotor rings if you've already got them. And yeah, I agree. Like when it comes to front derailleurs, it's all too easy to lose chains and cost someone a race. And I agree. Just spend the money, get that new red front derailleur, which is actually designed for the bigger rings, and be happy. But yeah.
Are we kind of moving on from chain watchers these days? I feel like, we were kind of getting into chain watchers there, like the 2012, 2014, like SRAM kind of came out with an integrated one on their front derailleur for their the Red 22 group, which I thought was a great idea. And actually that one was pretty clever with like its little fixed, like kind of adjustment screw where you could really dial the position of that chain watcher in. I still think chain watchers are a great idea, especially if you're using like, mixing brands and having a rotor chainring with a SRAM front derailleur, for example. It may not be a bad idea to include either a SRAM or third-party chain watcher just to give you a little extra protection on especially the downshift from the large ring to the small, because oftentimes when you have those huge chain rings and a large kind of tooth count difference between the two, you can especially kind of miss your mark when you drop it to the small ring. So I think having a chain watcher, something to shoot a bank shot off of as you're dropping it down to the small ring, might be still a good idea, especially on a TT bike where you're very rarely shifting that much anyway. But when you do, you really can't afford to have it come off. A
number of road bikes still integrate them these days. Like Trek, for example, is still giving that feature. So yeah, but I think it is, if your frame doesn't have that integrated, and you're running, as Brad says, large chain rings that are not the ideal brand, it probably is it's worth having for the 10 grams, and perhaps might not be as aero, but dropping a chain off isn't very aero. So I think
faster than walking.
Faster than walking. All right, Brad, let's jump to the next question. Let's hear from Tim.
Hi, Escape Collective team. Tim calling in from Canada. I had an issue recently where when riding on the indoor trainer, my chain was giving off a horrible smell. It's a Shimano 11-speed mountain bike chain. The bike was ridden outside prior to putting it on the trainer, but thoroughly cleaned and degreased. And then directly before riding, I put 1 drop of Silka Synergy per link and then wiped off the excess. The smell got quite bad while riding and I actually had to get off and let it clear the room. I've run Synergy on the trainer before with no issues, but a bit of searching online found someone on Reddit with a similar experience with Silka Synergetic. So hoping you have some ideas. Thanks.
All right, Tim, I actually didn't know the answer to this one, but I reached out to someone that I thought might. So Josh Portner, president, founder of Silka, responded, and he said he hasn't specifically heard of this as a complaint, but does say that his this Synergy and Synergetic both contain an ingredient that has a slight smell for about the first 30 minutes or so after application, as it is exposed to oxygen. And he says the Synergy, with the big E in it, has about 4 times this smelly ingredient. So yeah, he says it really can be smelt once the lube is heated. So he said the one complaint they've had is when a customer left a fingerprint of this stuff on their e-bike rotor, disc brake rotor, and then said not only did their brakes not really work after they had lubed their rotors, but that it smelled absolutely terrible when they did use the brakes, which is pretty funny. So Josh is kind of speculating that maybe a little bit of this lube perhaps dripped or got flung up onto the trainer where your trainer produced some heat, and that's kind of where the smell came from. So yeah, he sort of thinks it's perhaps within the belt or clutch of the trainer, and that's why all of a sudden you're smelling the lube. Makes sense. I can't really think of another great explanation to it, but there you go. Hopefully the smell dissipates and that you
could burn some incense while you're in there.
Yeah,
so that's another option.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Next question.
Hi there, Dave. Hi there, Brad. It's Paul here from Canberra. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Brad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've seen for XC riders there in the World Cups, especially for the ladies who are generally a little smaller and don't have as broader shoulders as the men. I'd love to hear your thoughts there. In the process of building up a Cervelo ZS5 for my wife Claire, and the 35mm, 800mm wide bars doesn't seem like the right choice to start with. Thanks a lot. Love the podcast. Have a great day.
All right, Brad. Any suggestions for Paul?
Yeah, I think Paul's onto something here. I think I did spend a number of years working with a young woman who's racing mountain bikes very similar to the type that your wife is using. And we were using 680 millimeter wide handlebars for Kate Courtney's width. She's 5'4" with shoes on, probably. Someone can convert that to metric, but she's a pretty small person. And I've often thought that it's similar to a seat post. Although a seat post, it's hard to run it at full extension. But a handlebar is kind of the same way. You have some adjustment there. They're not necessarily meant to be ridden at their maximum width, just as a seat post is not meant to be ridden at its maximum length. But it's got some room to play with. And I think, it's probably not something you want to just cut narrow right away, but you might either do it iteratively where you start at like, let's say 720 millimeters, which just a few years ago was kind of like a relatively wide bar for a cross country bike. It's actually wider than I ride 700 on mine. And I'm a 6'4" tall man. That's pretty narrow. But where I live, there's a lot of narrow passageways through trees and things in the woods, and riding very wide bars, you can actually not get through some of those. So some of it also comes from what I got used to when I started riding, which is obviously much narrower than that back in the day. But I like 700 to 720 mil bars personally, and it is narrow, I admit. But so
what did you find amongst the professional women's World Cup athletes? So Kate Courtney's on 680-ish. What about other athletes that you're aware of? Are they all around that width, or are there others that are trending wider? What sort of...
I sometimes wonder why people have what they have on their bike. I often think that people are running bars that are too wide for them. I think they run the bars at a stock width, and some of the athletes you see at a World Cup may not get the same level of support as others, and some may receive a bike from a manufacturer as part of a sponsorship deal, but maybe not have sort of the back end support to help tailor that bike and perfectly kind of tune every element of it to the rider, or may not realize or have the means or even think about changing anything, and just you pull a S-Works Epic out of the box. What could you possibly need to change? And so I think people sometimes don't know what they don't know and get used to riding something, and it may not be what the fitter would suggest, but they get used to it and then they like it, and then they don't want to change because they're like racing all the time. They don't want to have to adjust to things, and then it just goes like that for seasons and they never change. But I often think that people, men and women sometimes, but it's maybe more prone on women because they're so much smaller typically, and the bars are the same width usually for men and women when they come stock. So you see people running the stock width without really thinking about it. And I think that's what it boils down to. But I think if you really do think about it or actually try, you might find, it's like if you do push-ups with your hands really narrow, it's hard. If you do it with them really wide, it's also hard. And then there's a range in the middle where it's nice and comfortable. And it's kind of the same with handlebar width. And it's, it's a feeling. It's also a measurement that is relative to your actual body size. But some of it
and
is
also trail preference and all that.
Yeah, trail preference. Exactly. And so there's many factors, but I would say for smaller people, whether it's a man or a woman, definitely don't just accept a stock width and assume it's right for you without maybe talking to a fitter or trying something different. And you can just move the controls and the grips on your bar without actually cutting them. I wouldn't necessarily go for long mountain bike rides like that because you might misjudge your bar width and stuff when your hands are narrower than the actual. Yes. But, just to feel it riding around, maybe ride on like some dirt roads or some mellow trails and just get a feeling for that before you really start cutting. But definitely a very good question. That's worth, maybe some trial and error or some trial and success and finding that perfect fit.
Yeah. So it sounds like a range to hit would be somewhere between say 680 and 730. I'd say you probably end up somewhere between there. And your preferences may vary. I would also say with this, and this is probably not to get too into the weeds on this, but an 800mm wide handlebar doesn't belong on a cross-country mountain bike. I blame the likes of Pink Bike in their reviews for trying to trail bike every single cross-country bike, and that's just a wrong spec choice from Cervelo. If that bar is actually 800, I haven't double-checked whether that is the stock bar or not. But what I would say is I'm not a big fan of 35mm clamp diameter handlebars on cross-country bikes, and it's simply because they get overly stiff. So you'll end up getting unnecessary hand fatigue, and you just don't need a handlebar that stiff. And the issue there is if that handlebar was designed to be at 800mm, it might have some flex in it at its full 800mm. The more you cut it down, the stiffer it becomes. So by the time you get that bar down to 720 or 710 or 700, it's just going to be completely rigid. So my suggestion would be to actually find a handlebar that's 31.8mm clamp diameter, and from there, basically find one that's narrow to begin with, and therefore it'll be tuned for that width. So like, a race face next SL, for example, I think starts at about 720 as a width. But yeah, basically, your options will be more limited when you're looking for 31.8 carbon handlebars. But I would start there rather than really trying to cut down that 800mm bar and end up with an uncomfortable bar. So
maybe worth noting too on handlebars, there's usually like a range along the bar where it can be clamped by the controls. And if you're cutting an 800 bar down to a 700, you may actually position the controls inboard of where the bar is reinforced for those controls to be clamped, and you could risk damaging the bar. So usually bars that are like that are marked with something on them that tells you where the clampable range is. But that's also just a good thing to be aware of too before you cut your bars down and then realize you've sort of compromised the use of the bar altogether. So, and for a small woman too, you have some options to buy very lightweight bars, bars that are maybe they have a weight limit that a full-grown man might approach, but for a small woman, you could both enhance the ride feel, like Dave said, where it's not so stiff. We talked on a previous podcast about the virtues of carbon as a seat post material. The same applies as a handlebar material too. And some of my favorite bars out there, the Dorimo Spanish, very lightweight Gucci carbon. I know, Dave, you hate when I bring this stuff up, but they're not that expensive. It's like $180 for a handlebar for a mountain bike. That's not that. Okay. Yeah, or euros, but yeah, it's about the same. But they're sub 100 grams with like a 90 something.
I'll be honest, those scare me a little. As a reformed weight weenie, that particular suggestion does scare me. But okay.
No, they're good. They're good.
All right.
They're great, especially for a smaller person. And that's my point. I'm not saying, you and I need to go put these on our trail bikes, Dave, but
sure.
They make one that with the 20 or 25 gram penalty has no weight limit. That's only 125 grams. So there's also that, but it comes in widths. So like 40 mil width increments from like 640 up to maybe 740 or something, 760. So it's, so you don't have to cut them down too much and risk, like I just said, with the clampable range being compromised or interfered with. But that's an option. If you're looking to switch bars and switch clamp sizes, might as well have a little bit of fun and upgrade yourself. And, that's a pretty massive weight savings for almost any stock handlebar. So you'd definitely be pulling I would say 50 to 100 grams. Yeah. A lighter handlebar, which is almost a 50% weight reduction, which is insane. So yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, let's, there you go, Paul. Hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully Claire doesn't end up on a 100-gram handlebar that gets her hurt. I'm just kidding. All right, let's move on to the lucky last question, which comes from a mystery caller who I'm guessing is out of France, given the accent, but apologize if you're not.
Hi, Dave and Brad. Thank you for taking my question. So I do run a full Rival Explorer on my gravel bike, One Bike, and I find the range to be a bit limiting. And so I was wondering if I could keep the derailleur but put a wolf tool throttling or something alike, plus cranking the big gap to get a 1048 or a 1050 cassette at the back without having to buy a brand new derailleur for it. And also about the derailleur, I found that I have quite a bit of play at the mounting, just at the dropouts. And I was wondering if it was worth upgrading the mounting bolt of the rival Explorer derailleur to a force or red level, such as what's done in the mountain bike side, where I know you can upgrade a GX bolt to XX or SL because the construction is superior and the materials are a bit better, as I do understand. So thank you very much. And I enjoy your podcast a lot.
All right, Brad. So rival Explore, which we can assume is AXS because that's the only option really. It's designed around a 10 to 44 tooth cassette. What do you reckon about going bigger?
Well, there are a couple of ways to do it. So I'll give you two because that's what I do when you ask me for one. There are two ways I can think of that will definitely achieve this. One is going a little bigger and a little smaller. A company called E13, which you may be familiar with, Dave, and listeners, exists, and they make a 945. So a unique cassette, which gives you both a little bit higher and a little bit lower, but not much of either. But it may be just enough that you can actually, if you're happy with your high end and just want a little bit lower low end, you could potentially reduce your chainring size by 2 teeth. Now that you have a 9 tooth back there, achieving roughly the same almost gear at the high end, and then also get yourself 1 tooth lower plus 2 teeth lower in the chainring department, which would be effectively like 1 gear less or so, maybe 1.5 kind of in terms of the ratio. So that's one option. That would probably be the cheapest option. They make a 12-speed version of that. And
also a little bit complicated as far as, I mean, you're adding the 9 tooth is going to be less efficient.
Yes.
But you're also, durability-wise, I'd say you're probably compromising versus a SRAM cassette. But
yeah, probably. But, if you spend a lot of time in the 9, then get a bigger chainring also, but yeah, again, so that would be my cheapest option where you get a little bit of what you're asking for, where you would get everything you're asking for. When we hinted at the virtues of AXS a moment ago in a previous question, for the cost of that cassette, you could also buy an AXS GX mountain bike rear derailleur, which again, doesn't plug in, but pairs wonderfully well with all of your existing AXS components. Of course, you're still in the market for a cassette at that point, but you'll have the option to go to as much as a 52 tooth large ring with the 10 at the bottom. And that would probably be the most perfect solution, I would say.
No compromise.
No compromise.
Yeah.
And
other than
I'd say
price,
like $350 or so for the derailleur. Probably about the same again, $300 for a decent cassette. You can
sell your old one.
Less. Yeah, sell your old one. All in. $500-$600 and you can do it. Chain also, I guess, but. That would be the way I would really recommend doing it.
Yes. So I guess it's worth reiterating. Like there are ways to bodge this and to hack it, and there are people that will say that they've managed to wind in the B gap adjustment and fit a 52 tooth cassette on there, with an Explorer derailleur. And I guess our advice and our experience is just we wouldn't do that for a paying customer. We wouldn't feel confident to send them out on the trail with that. At some point, either, misshifts are going to happen, the derailleur might fail because it's way beyond its design intention, and it's just not really responsible information to give out. So that's kind of why, Brad is suggesting get the actual derailleur, spend the money, and be happy and not feel like your bike is on the fringe of failing at any moment. So I think that's the main thing, and that's also why I don't recommend things like that Wolf Tooth Road Link or the expander links. It's just, in my experience, the shifting just isn't quite as good. It becomes more sensitive to adjustment. It's definitely more sensitive to alignment. So if your derailleur takes a bump, you're much more likely to end up with a bent hanger. That causes all sorts of issues. But it also, it does things to the derailleur in ways that the derailleur wasn't designed to handle. Namely, it sort of, I'd say most noticeably, I'd say it reduces chain wrap around the cassette. So you end up having a cassette and chain that's more susceptible to wear. So it's more likely to skip once wear does set in. It'll increase wear because your chain is wrapping around less of the cassette at any point, and your shifting's just not as good as well. So I think the same applies to like some of the aftermarket cages that may or may not work, like the Garbrook cage upgrade, for example. Just end of the day, like you're just introducing compromises into your drivetrain. And if you spend enough to own a SRAM AXS bike, just you may as well have perfect shifting all the time. So get the right derailleur.
Yeah, and if you ride in two states, one where you need that mullet style setup, or one where you're on, let's say, more of an all-road approach, Dave, to your gravel lifestyle, perhaps you keep your chain and your old derailleur and your old cassette on standby, and it's a pretty straightforward swap if you're somewhat handy and familiar with how things go on. And there's plenty of online tutorials that SRAM themselves have produced, and they're very good. If you have any doubts, and then you have the versatility to go back and forth and have kind of the optimal setup for whatever you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, a few options there. I would also, I'd say that XPLR derailleur could probably, given the B tension on most bikes, most modern derailleur hangers, probably get up to like a 46 tooth cassette.
Yeah,
I think pretty safely.
Say 50, 52.
50 is pushing it.
I think you would exceed the chain wrap, like the cage's ability to wrap the chain, where in like the smallest 2, maybe 3 cogs, you would have like a loose, saggy chain that didn't have any spring tension from the derailleur anymore. If you tried to run a 52 in the chain long enough to run a 52 through that derailleur, so that would be, I think, where the compromise would be most felt.
Yep. And then the chain wrap that I was discussing, where the derailleur is basically really sitting behind the cassette rather than underneath it. So
and there you're just not engaging very many teeth on the cog that you're in. Yeah. That's the concern where you get skipping, like you were talking about, Dave, where you're not engaging enough teeth where the load can actually it's not distributed among enough teeth to actually support the load you're putting down, so it will jump and feel like a worn drivetrain. Yeah,
the oldie Campagnolo issue up until recent 12-speed, where as soon as you get some chain wear, your cassette is also worn out. Anyway, that's going to upset some Campagnolo fans. So
they're always a little bit upset. It's okay.
Perfect place to wrap it up. I think that's it for this week as far as the Ask a Wrench, and we'll certainly have more to get to. There's a growing list of Ask a Wrench questions, and I guess if you're wondering how you can ask a question, we're taking voice submissions. You can head to escapecollective.com/hello, introduce yourself, where you're from, and then ask a question. Try to keep it brief, and it's probably worth noting that functionality, the ability to ask a question, is exclusively available to members who support Escape Collective. Please sign up, join, support what we do. We don't have any advertising. We are fully member funded. There are no affiliate links or other sponsored content that keeps us afloat. It's purely down to your memberships that allows us to do these podcasts and allows us to create the content. So check it out, and thanks to all of you who already support what we do. A few other little housekeeping notes. I am headed away. I've got a bit of a bike launch to get to, and then I'm going to take a bit of time off after that. So you won't hear from me for the next couple of weeks, but it sounds like Ronan is going to take the reins and potentially bring Kaylee in, and hopefully include Brad as well, not leave you out in the wind there, Brad. So I don't know what'll happen. Maybe it'll be the best podcast we've ever had. Who knows? Fingers crossed. Maybe I'll be without a job. It'll be so good. But anyway, the next 2 weeks you won't hear from me. But stay tuned. There will be more episodes to come, and I'll be back the week of the 16th. And then while I'm talking, I'll just give a little plug to my next threaded article. If you like anything to do with tools, maintenance, mechanics, DIY, whatever it may be, I can almost guarantee you'll enjoy Threaded. So please head to escapecollective.com, check out Threaded. It's my baby, and this week's is all about new tools, so enjoy it. All right, Brad, always good chatting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It was great to talk to you again this week, as always, and also thanks to the listeners who have reached out to my new bike shop in the DC area. It's actually in downtown DC, so if you happen to be in that neck of the woods, do look for us. We're in there working on bikes all day, and we're enjoying these questions that you ask on the Ask a Wrench as well, because it's something to think about and talk about, oftentimes things we've not thought about before. So it's a fun way to keep my mind engaged and my wheels turning. So appreciate that. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, that's Geek Warning for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and you'll hear from us again soon. Cheers.
Bye.